My name is Julie Myers. I'm 55. I live in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, and I fit into the very end of LGBTQ as transgender and queer.
Okay, and so are your pronouns she, her?
She, her, yes.
Okay. So you're living in Sunbury now. I understand that's not where you grew up, right?
No, I was born in Pottstown, which is right outside of Philly, and then moved around small town Pennsylvania from the age of 9 when my father went to seminary and became an ordained minister. And I lived in this area about 15 years ago in Selinsgrove, and then ended up in Phoenix, Arizona for 9 years before moving back here.
What brought you to the Selinsgrove area at first?
At first, my second wife grew up in Lewisburg, and we visited here, visited some friends in Selinsgrove after we first met, and I just fell in love with this entire area. And we moved up to Selinsgrove in 2005.
So what took you to Arizona?
A moving truck. My third wife became a teacher, and she did her student teaching in Selinsgrove, and she got her teaching certificate in late 2010, right around the time the newly elected governor slashed the education budget to the point where nobody was hiring new teachers. So we looked around, and there were some teaching jobs in the South, but we didn't want to live in the deep South. And there were plenty of teaching jobs in Texas, and we didn't want to live in Texas. And north of that, it's Jesus and tornadoes, and we didn't want to live there. Arizona had a lot of teaching jobs. And so she applied a bunch of places, had some phone and Skype interviews, and she got hired, and we moved to Arizona and found out why there were so many teaching jobs. But we both fell in love with the area. In fact, she's still out there.
And then what brought you back to Sunbury?
The end of my marriage, and I have 3 children living in this area here, and we both agreed that if we lived too close to each other, we'd probably end up getting back together, and that wouldn't be a good thing, so I came home.
So how long have you been back in Sunbury?
I came back here in the summer of 2020. One of the reasons I moved back was Pennsylvania hadn't had the rise in COVID cases that Arizona was seeing, so I wanted to get away from that as well.
What do you like about the Sunbury area then?
Pretty much everything. It's a beautiful little town. I mean, you have that park on Market Street that looks sort of like Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life. I am fortunate enough to live in an old Victorian apartment house right along the river. The view is beautiful. I'm close to everything, and I've met tons of wonderful people, have a great job, and other than winter, I love it here.
Winter is a hard one, yeah. So talk to me about some of your background as far as your education and your career path. Tell me about that.
My career path is rather interesting, but my education background, I did a year and a half at Temple University after high school and discovered that I am not a studier. And so after 3 semesters of doing nothing really but hanging around the college radio station, I dropped out for a year and really haven't been back to school since. I got married on my 21st birthday, tried to live the straight male life and had 3 kids, worked through that. My first wife became sick and died, and I remarried, had another child, and um, I've worked in industry, I've worked in the medical field as a medical transcriptionist, I've worked in the nonprofit world as a development director. I've done, when I was living in Phoenix, I was a community educator for many years, speaking to community college and university classrooms about the wonders and glory of being me and answering questions about the transgender experience. I've done driving for the medical industry. I've done phone sex. And now I'm working for a food manufacturer in Northumberland and thoroughly enjoying myself.
Sounds like you've had a long career of things.
Yes.
A wide variety of things.
Yes, wide variety is a polite way to describe it. I was 43 when I started taking hormones and transitioned socially several months later in the spring of 2011. So I was almost 44 years old before I transitioned.
Tell me about your journey to get to that point.
I knew who I was when I was 4 years old.
You said 4 or 40?
4.
4. Okay.
Among my earliest memories is knowing who I was, and that was a girl. But at 4 years old, you lack the vocabulary to adequately explain. You lack the intellectual capacity to explain it in a way that a grown-up is going to understand. And I also lacked the environment to have what I was saying listened to and heard. I mean, this was 1971. I lived in a small town, born to a small, average, conservative family, and the last thing they would have understood was their son saying, "No, wait, I'm a girl." And so I learned very early on to hide that. I don't quite remember how I learned that, but I do know that by 6 or 7 years old, I had learned the lesson that I wasn't supposed to talk about this. I wasn't supposed to act on this. So I'm firmly convinced that very early on, I voiced this to my parents. I knew who I was. And anybody they would have talked to in 1971, family doctor, even if they would have talked to a psychiatrist, psychologist, minister, the advice they would have gotten was to double down and condition this out of their child. And that is what they did.
So what was that like growing up from childhood to teenager?
Awful. I had to hide who I was. I had no idea. Until the age of 10 or 11, I thought I was the only person in the world to feel this different, this strange. And it wasn't until I was 10 or 11 and I happened to cut school one day and I was watching Donahue and he had on tennis pro Renee Richards, who was one of the very first people to come out and talk publicly about being trans. And it was the first time I'd heard the word transsexual was in vogue at that time. Now the preferred term is transgender. And it was the very first time I knew that somebody else felt this way. Somebody else understood what it had been like for me at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old to lay in bed every night. And after saying my prayers with my mother, the light turning off, and then saying an extra prayer that I would wake up in the morning and be who I actually was. And I can't describe the joy that I felt knowing that this was not just me, but that you could do something about it. But I was 10, and other than having the knowledge, there wasn't much I could do about it. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't say anything. I went through my teenage years and kept it hidden, tried to do everything I could to be the normal, straight son that my parents expected me to be.
So what happened when you got out of high school into college? You said you married your first wife?
Yes. After dropping out, I met my first wife, and we worked for the same company in Reading, and we met on March 12th, 1988, and married June 6th, 1988. I adopted a daughter that she already had, and then we had 2 children of our own. She knew how I identified. I did not hide that from her. I never hid that from anybody I ever dated. But at that time, I couldn't have imagined doing anything about it. I mean, that was still the late 80s, and there was even more of a stigma attached to being trans than there is today, although there's quite a stigma today. And so I just figured I would live with it. You know, I would dress as a woman when I was alone, when she and the kids weren't home. I would just try to find some kind of outlet for these feelings, because I still believed that I could condition it away. But you can't do that. You can't not be who you are. It literally is like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
How did you end up getting to that point where you said to yourself, I can't live like I'm living?
I married my third wife in 2007, and she was truly my best friend. And she knew how I identified. She accepted that. And I had told her, you know, I don't know if I'm ever going to have to do anything about this. And she said, well, if you do, then, you know, I'm here for you. And it was mid 2010, and I just got to a point where I was feeling exceptionally suicidal, exceptionally depressed. I could not go on. And I talked with her about it, and she said, make an appointment with the doctor. And so I did. And that's what set me down the path to Julie.
Were any of your other marriages affected by how you felt?
No. It added a stressor, but it didn't fundamentally affect anything. Like I said, my first marriage, we had our ups and downs. We were 2 kids who should never have gotten married. My second wife is a lovely, beautiful woman who I reached out to at a time when, you know, my kids were without a mother, and we should never have been together. And we realized that, and were able to move on. But I don't think my identity had anything to do with the other fundamental problems that we had.
Okay. So then on the journey to meet Julie, when did you start using the name Julie?
After I had started the hormones in 2010, and right around the time that I socially transitioned, went from presenting male to presenting female, I've always been a big genealogy buff. and I was doing an extensive research into my mother's family's history, and the name Juliana kept popping up. And I always wanted to keep my initials because they were what was inscribed on my wedding ring, and Juliana just stuck, and I knew that's who I was.
So then you said that was about 2010. Where were you living at that time?
In Selinsgrove.
Okay. So you started transitioning in Seattle. What was that like out in public with your...
Actually, it was rather seamless. I don't remember running into any real difficulties. In fact, my daughter was in second grade at the time, and I had been a school lunch volunteer since she was in kindergarten, and I transitioned in that year she was in second grade, and other than one or two parent complaints to the principal, who, to her everlasting credit, told the parent that if they didn't like the fact that I was there, they could come in and be a school lunch volunteer. Otherwise, they could mind their own business. The kids were fantastic, and kids generally are great. I mean, it is both an incredibly complicated issue, sex and gender, but it's also a very simple one. And kids will accept a simple explanation and move on. You know, they don't care. Adults could take a big lesson from kids. It was more with my family that I had an issue, and still do, than it was with...
Talk to me a little bit about that, Julie.
My parents weren't very accepting. My father more so than my mother. I'm still not allowed to visit or see my mother. I can talk to my father by text, but that's about it, just as long as she doesn't know that he's talking to me. I have an older sibling and a younger sibling, and our relationships were fundamentally altered by my transitioning. We don't really talk to each other. My sister has been very clear that while she will talk to me when necessary, she will never accept me. She has a brother, and that is what I will always be. And I've always found it interesting and depressing that what I am as far as somebody's possession, their son, their brother, is more important than what I am in reality, which is me. And it took a while to get over the hurt from that, but it's like I have always told my children, it's up to me to invite you to the party. If you don't want to come, that's on you, and it's more cake for me.
So I imagine it's been pretty difficult with not having that family support there.
It is. I understand my family very well. I understand the time and the times in which my parents were raised, the people who raised them, the culture and society around them, and the fact that my father was a minister, and everything in our household was geared towards what other people might say about us. And even though my father's retired, it's something that my mother has never let go of, that being embarrassed about what people might say about us. I don't hold anything against any family members who don't want anything to do with me or don't want to extend the effort to understand me. It's their loss. My parents had a child who was depressed and hurt and angry and suicidal for most of her life, and now she's happy and thriving. And I just wish there were a way for them to understand that. They don't have to understand anything else, but I wish they'd understand that I'm happier now.
Where did you find the most support through all this?
Interestingly, from my in-laws, 3 of my 4 children are still in my life and still very supportive. And otherwise, I just built a community. I built a new family from friends, especially when we moved to Phoenix. And I became involved in political work and advocacy. And I cherry-picked a new family.
Do you have any stories then, and other than your family members, of facing discrimination for what you are and how you present and what you did?
What I've experienced is more or less secondhand discrimination, political discrimination, if you'll put it that way. Just by being a member of a community where, especially in the last year or so, there are whole swaths of the country where I can't go to the bathroom. We had been making progress very steadily, actually, from 2010 to maybe 2016, 17, where the laws against us were being torn down. And it's only been in the last few years that not only are the gains that we made being overturned, but they're being replaced by just bigoted antediluvian thinking being spread on the internet and by certain news channels about trans people. And you see laws being passed that make it harder and harder and harder for us to just exist. I just read today about a new rule in the state of Missouri that goes into effect on the 27th of April that will effectively bar adult transgender people as well as minor transgenders from accessing basic health care. And while I don't live in Missouri, I do live in a state where a predominance of voters support a specific political point of view that agrees with the people who run Missouri and Tennessee and countless other states where our existence is being threatened.
If there was something that you would say to people in this area, what would that be?
To vote with a little empathy. I have plenty of friends who are rather conservative, who vote conservative, but who otherwise support me, at least to my face, who accept me into spaces where you wouldn't expect a trans person to be accepted. But yet, they support candidates and they support political philosophies that would be very happy if people like me didn't exist. And there's a cognitive dissonance there that I have spent my entire life trying to understand, and I don't. You either accept me and everybody like me, or you don't accept any of us. It's very hard to put into words the anger and the frustration and the pain and the sadness to see the essence of who we are, still the butt of jokes, to see people making careers out of hating us. Look at just in the last few weeks, the internet exploding over the fact that, what was it, Bud Light decided to associate itself with a trans TikTok star, and people are metaphorically losing their over that. It's I just wish somebody would explain to me where that hatred comes from.
So, what is it like living here in the Valley for you now while you're in Sunbury?
I'm always cautious. I try to be extra outgoing and extroverted. More as a way to, I don't know how to put this. I figure the more I talk and the friendlier I am, I can build connections with people that way rather than have them focus on the fact that I'm trans.
That's a conscious choice then to be as friendly as possible so people
Yeah,
like you?
and to be very out.
Okay.
I decided very early on that I would not hide who I am. I looked at myself in those first few years as being quote unquote obvious. So I figured if I would just out myself to whoever I met, then it would take that question off the table. And if they wanted to know what anything about being trans, they could ask, which led to the community education work that I did. But I hate the feeling of being in a conversation with somebody and knowing that they're asking questions in their head and they're not paying attention to whatever connection we might have in the moment. So I've just been very open. Not every trans person feels comfortable doing that. The attitudes that I know people have, I can understand why people aren't willing to be open. That's just a choice that I've made.
You mentioned at the very beginning, obviously, the T in LGBTQ. Describe to me what it means to be queer in your eyes.
Queer is a term that, once pejorative, has been adopted by a lot of LGBTQ people to just describe an attitude, an ethos about being different. Queer is a word that was always used to mean different, and then it was applied especially to lesbian and gay people, especially gay men. It just means I'm not going to tell you who or how I identify. Just know that it's not what you expect.
Forgive me, did you say that you are in a relationship now?
No.
Okay. So as a transgender female, you still date women, correct?
I haven't really dated since being back here.
Okay, because I was going to ask you if you're nervous about going out and being on dates, but if that's not the case, then I guess that's, you don't have to.
No, it just, I've tried, but it isn't. I think in a small town area, it's hard to meet. If I were to date men, it would be hard to find a man who'd be willing to admit publicly that he's dating a trans woman. Um, I've I've had that experience. But I don't want to call it discrimination because preference is preference. You know. Um, I think it would be easier in an urban area where the dating pool was larger to meet people. Trans women, especially, are a niche category, and to be honest, after 3 marriages, I'm fine. I have cats and wine. I'm good.
The 3 essentials.
Yes, that's it. And I have 1,000 books in my apartment. So between the cats, the wine, and the books, I don't need to go down that path again anytime soon.
Was there anything else that maybe any points that you wanted to make that I didn't think to ask you?
I would just ask that people have more empathy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have educated yourself about what it means to be trans or to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, asexual, non-binary. Just ask yourself, how would you want to be treated if that were you? How would you want your child to be treated? You don't have to know everything about somebody to find them worthy of respect. And I think that's what it comes down to. What LGBTQ people face these days is a lack of common decency, empathy, and respect. We just want to get by, 41% of trans people attempt suicide at least once in their lives. There is no other demographic where there is that large a percentage of people who attempt to take their lives even once. I've heard people say, well, that points towards a mental instability. Obviously, you wouldn't want to kill yourself unless you were crazy, right? But just imagine what it's like to spend your entire life from childhood on looking in the mirror and knowing that what you see you can't trust. How can you trust the world if you can't trust what's in the mirror? How can you be happy if everything everybody you love is telling you goes against who you know you are? How do you expect anyone to have any kind of strong mental health when their families reject them and hate them and their peers reject them and they can't get jobs and they can't get housing? I've been very fortunate. I've been able to work. I have a place to live, but I know that's not the case for so many trans people. There's a reason we're depressed, and it's not because we're trans. It's because most people don't try to understand.